Okay, so the most common type of sort of advanced lighting is going to be some sort of subsurface, and there's multiple different ways to do subsurface in Unreal. So what do I mean by subsurface? Well, if we jump over and have a look at these images, some objects, some materials, some physical things in the real world, when light enters them and bounces around, it picks up the color of the thing inside it, or the subsurface. And so if we have a look at sort of bits of skin, where you've got thin parts of the skin, the light is actually able to bounce around, come through the skin and pick up the color of the blood and the color of the red inside, and that's what we get here. That's called subsurface scattering. Very common for character rendering. As you can see here, we have lots of faces, but also used for things like leaves. If I could spell leaf, here we are. So light coming through a leaf isn't going to be, a leaf isn't going to fully stop the light coming through. It's going to allow some light transmission, and then we're going to get some light bleed coming through. And there is a blend mode entirely for that, and we'll have a look at that. And then you have subsurface on things like wax candles, so other objects as well. One of the reasons they give off so much nice light is because the light actually bounces around inside and illuminates the whole thing. You can see, I don't need all of these adverts, go away. The light, yeah, the illumination happening, these are all 3D renders. If you look at real candles somewhere, if you can find reference of a real object these days, then that's good. I want an actual photo, not some Blender image. Everyone's talking about rendering rather than real things, but yeah, next time you see a candle, have a look, and you can see it's got some subsurface happening with it as the light's bouncing around inside. So what do we have in Unreal? Well, there's subsurface, that is this one here. There's subsurface profile, and there's two-sided foliage, and they're all different types of subsurface shader. And pre-integrated skin, that's also a subsurface shader. So subsurface, the difference is you get access to a subsurface color input. If I disable this, put back to default lit, that's going to go away. So we've got a pure white material here, but if I turn it to subsurface and put a blue value in, I'm picking up that blue value underneath, and that's going to take into account things like thickness and direct light and indirect light. So we see we're not getting any blue in the direct part, but we are in the shaded part. And the opacity pin, we're still using an opaque surface here, but the opacity pin is now available. Well, that gets hijacked and converted into what's called transmission, and controls how much the light, or how much the blue is coming through. And you can see here, very low transmission, we're getting quite a lot of blue, and if I put that up, now we're getting a much less. So there's no need for an opacity input when we're dealing with an opaque surface, but because the surface does let light through it using subsurface, we get access to that via the opacity pin. A bit like how metallic controls two different blends, there's the opacity pin does lots of different things depending on what our shading model is. And we'll see that a couple of times. So then we have our different transmission values. So that's subsurface. It's used for things like candle wax, ice, that kind of stuff. Foliage has its own shader model, which we'll have a look at, and also skin. And so that's the basics of what subsurface is doing. But if we open the next one, this is the pre-integrated skin shader. Basically it's the same kind of process, same inputs and everything, but it has some extra optimizations built in specifically for human skin. So humans, very popular thing to be rendering in game art or real-time CG or anything like that, and so because of that they've put a little bit extra work in to optimize for skin. Not entirely sure what they are, but they are here. So if you're dealing with human skin, or any kind of skin, I guess, if you want to do orcs, you can make this green, that would probably be fine. But But if you're dealing with any kind of skin shading, you probably want to use the skin shader, but it's just a sort of specific type of subsurface. So if it's not looking right, you can always try Subsurface, and it will be a little bit more expensive, but maybe a little bit more responsive. Next type of subsurface is Subsurface Profile. And this uses a specific subsurface profile input. So similar to Subsurface Shader, but it works in screen space. It says here, useful for characters where the subsurface effect is only visible at thin bits of skin such as ears. And so it gives you a different set of controls. I'll be honest, I'm not a character artist and haven't explored these too much, but they are here within the engine. And obviously well documented in Epic's documentation, but the subsurface profile uses a separate file. So if I go into my material editor, we're in shading model, this is actually a separate asset. So materials, subsurface profile, no, yes, subsurface profile, and then you can set your colors and things like that, and all of the different settings. Lobe mix, again, not a character artist, haven't really experimented with these, but that's what they are, and that's where they live, and that gives us a better more control over subsurface. So the last type of subsurface is two-sided foliage. Definitely use this one. Optimize, again, all of these kind of shaders that involve slightly more complex light can get expensive, so they will have slightly different optimizations within them depending on what they're doing. Optimized for thin surfaces with light transmission, or such as leaves. So you can see here the primary color is the top one, and then as light comes through and we look at the back side, we get the transmission and the light kind of coming through. A little bit of control. This is commonly used with a masked setup, and so we can add our sort of outline of our leaf. I don't think I've got any leaves in here. No. Debug. Let's just use this one, and so you can control the outside of your shape, while also having nice opaque rendering with two-sided lighting and surface coming through. If I were to just change this to where are we? Default lit. Our backside here is obviously not picking up that subsurface color. So another optimization. Generally, you want to use the right one for what you're dealing with. So if it's skin, use the skin shader or the subsurface profile. If it's leaves or two-sided foliage, use that. Or if it's anything kind of solid like ice or wax, use that one. But they're all types of subsurface, so emulating light entering into a surface and bouncing around.